All right, we got a lot of news to get to, so let's begin. Right now, a U.S. representative in Moscow is trying to get Russia to agree to a 30-day ceasefire with Ukraine. Meanwhile, at the White House, the NATO Secretary General will sit down with President Trump. Also on the agenda at the White House, funding. President Trump has demanded other NATO allies to contribute more. CBS News White House reporter Olivia Rinaldi is joining me now to go over all of the late-breaking details as we come to air. Olivia, as these two meet, the special envoy, his name is Steve Witkoff. He's in Moscow trying to get Russia to sign off on that ceasefire. What are you hearing about the possibility of that?
Yeah, he just landed a short while ago in Moscow to have these meetings with the Russians about this very delicate ceasefire that could happen potentially. That came out of a meeting earlier in the week between the Ukrainians and the U.S. delegation in Saudi Arabia. Kyiv agreed to a potential 30-day ceasefire if the Russians would agree. Now we're hearing from the Russians, and they sound quite wary of this deal. A Kremlin aide this morning already said there's really no reason for Russia to sign it. It would just give the Ukrainians time to regroup and get back on the battlefield. We also saw Putin earlier today in a video that was released, notably wearing military fatigues. He was also in an area of Russia that was recently taken over by Ukrainians, and there's been a bloody battle playing out there. It's an area called Kursk. While in that area, he delivered a message to the forces there telling them to fight on, to get the Ukrainian forces out of Russian territory and to really drive forward in that area. That doesn't sound like a man who's exactly open to peace or ceasefire at this moment. So we're hearing from the Russians. Steve Witkoff is there to have that meeting. We'll be watching very closely. We were told from the Kremlin that we should expect to hear more from Putin today specifically about that deal. We already heard from that Kremlin aide who sounded like it might not be in their best interest to sign it, but very, very delicate situation right now.
All right, let's talk about NATO. What guarantees is the president hoping to secure from NATO, and how is his recent criticism of NATO swaying the U.S.'s commitment to the organization?
Yeah, whiplash back to the other side of the world, where Trump is meeting with the NATO Secretary General in the White House today. And certainly the topic of peace in Ukraine will come up and the deal with the Russians. But instead of moving in lockstep with NATO, Trump has been very open and very critical about our nearly 80-year-old alliance with European allies and other allies across the world to prevent, Russia's gain and spread and influence across the world. So Trump is expected to host a meeting with him today. It won't be no press conference, but there will be a little bit of an opening for the press to get in there and ask some questions. Last week, when Trump was asked questions about NATO, he kind of diminished the standing of Article 5. That's the core basis of this 80-year-old alliance, which means that NATO countries believe if one gets attacked, they all get attacked. And it's because of that core value that has really prevented war from spreading across the world. In the last 80 years or so. Trump, when asked about that last week, he said, do you really think they're going to come and protect us, meaning the U.S., if the U.S. were attacked? He said they're supposed to, but I'm not so sure. So really casting doubt on Article 5, also saying previously that NATO should be giving more to their own defenses, that there's an ocean between the U.S. and Europe and what's going on with the war in Ukraine, so they should be spending more money on that. Obviously not something the NATO Secretary General wants to hear, and he's going to have to really, sounds like, do some convincing in that White House Oval Office meeting today to Trump to show him why this treaty, this alliance, really matters.
And finally, Olivia, just as we were coming on to air, I noticed my phone blowing up with notifications, and we're just learning now why the White House is actually pulling the nomination of Dave Weldon to be the director of the CDC. So what are you hearing about that?
Yeah, this happened just a short while ago. This is breaking news. Dave Weldon, who was the nominee to be the CDC director, the White House pulled his nomination. A White House official or someone familiar with it told us it was clear he didn't have the votes in the Senate. He was supposed to appear this morning at a hearing in front of the Senate Health Committee. And right before that, they canceled the hearing. They pulled his nomination. He's someone who is very close to Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the Health and Human Services Secretary. So a notable relationship there, and a little bit of background on exactly who he is. Weldon is a former congressman from Florida. He served for 14 years. He, during that that time was a prominent anti-vaxxer, really causing doubt, casting questions on the efficacy of vaccines and whether or not it caused autism. We've obviously seen people who have had similar views who have gone through the nomination process in the Senate and have made it out. It's clear, though, that there was something different about his nomination. The White House recognized that, and they pulled the nomination as a result.
All right, Olivia Rinaldi with all the late-breaking details at this hour. Thank you, Olivia. Appreciate it.